Is gentrification a net good or bad? I have a hard time wrapping my head around this one. Don't we want neighborhoods to get better? I have been labeled a gentrifier in my own town because I'm fixing up a house in a poorer area. What's the alternative? Houses fall into disrepair? Is gentrification bad in the long run? Help me understand, please. The negative I hear is that it causes rent prices to go up and then people can't afford to live there anymore. Fixing up rundown neighborhoods is good for the long-term sustainability of the neighborhood. The alternative is to leave the area to rot and decay, which isn't good. There are subtle differences in the definition of gentrification depending on who you're talking to. The net good is that you go into a dilapidated, decaying neighborhood and improve things so that people who grew up there can live there again. See HGTV's Bargain Block series. The net bad is that you go into a neighborhood where low-income people can afford to live and upgrade it to a point that they can't live there anymore. Example HGTV's Good Bones series. Transforming a 150K neighborhood into an 800K neighborhood lines the investors' pockets, but displaces families, and those families are running out of places to go. Change is inevitable, and gentrification is simply change. The world isn't zero-sum. Someone's gain is not by definition someone else's loss. We should all seek to raise the standard of living for everyone. The challenge is that over the long term people are better off. Benefits are not distributed evenly. And in the short term, some people may lament the changing neighborhood, a different vibe or culture. Some people may be priced out of their own neighborhoods, with few places to go. That is a real impact to a real person. It isn't that gentrification is bad or you are bad for participating in it. But we should not lack empathy for the people who are impacted. It depends if you are the gentrifier or the gentrifee. It's great for people who own property. It's evil for the people who get displaced. I mean, who wants to get kicked out of their community? Good for property owners and cities. Sometimes bad for renters. It depends, is it happening to a disinvested community or an overinvested community? The poorer you are, the worse it is. Depends on if you're the one profiting or the one getting pushed out of your neighborhood. Probably a net gain for local tax collection. But it usually forces the poor further out into the shittier areas in the suburbs, often making their commutes more challenging, especially if they rely on public transit. Gentrification is typically good, except when it pushes property values up to the point that the people living there can no longer afford the taxes, etc., and are forced to move. Especially bad in areas where a family home that's been passed down is forced to be sold. Do you want to get economically pushed out of where you live? Good if you own property, bad if you own property and you're poor. Gentrification is a symptom of a shortage of housing, pushing wealthier people into poorer areas. The dominoes keep falling and someone ends up in the street. The real problem is lack of housing, and the solution is build more housing. As usual, the rich take theirs and leave everyone else to fight for the scraps. We want the neighborhoods to get better, not at the cost of displacing those who currently live there, which has been the case for decades. I don't like when gentrification also robs an area of its character. Replacing local dive bars with shitty overpriced chain restaurants as an example. Gentrification often does not solve the core issues. It just moves them to a different neighborhood. So most of the poor disenfranchised remain so. Some people move up economically. And rich get much richer. The city-state whatever spends a bunch of money to make this happen. It doesn't have to be like this. Coupled with housing programs and small business development, gentrifying efforts can uplift the people, not just the place. But usually that doesn't happen. Half measures are used, which just relocate the suffering to somewhere less visible. It doesn't help people that don't own property, increasing the gap between haves and have-nots. Renters can't afford to rent is a problem for the economy. I've benefited from rising values. Renters don't. Gentrification prices people out of neighborhoods they live in. If you don't care about people having homes, then gentrification is fabulous. I'm not sure. Gentrification just moves poverty from one place to another. Anyone saying it's bad doesn't live in the real world. You're fixing up houses that no one wants to live in anyway. You're making a bad area good. It's simple. A basic manufacturing business at one time possibly still do use a just-in-time inventory system so that they have enough of what they need to keep production going, but that they do not have any excess sitting around. Housing today is in a similar situation. The real problem with housing is not housing. People want the ability to move, and that ability to move has become limited. The problem is that it depends what your definition of better is. If your only measure of a good neighborhood is real estate values, then you probably see gentrification as a good thing. If you want to buy a house in a certain community and live there, and participate in that community as it currently is, then you probably see gentrification as a bad thing. And if you're buying that house to flip it, you are not entitled to be upset that someone else sees you as a gentrifier. Because that's literally what you're doing. If you don't like it, don't flip houses. I think it's generally a good thing. We all want our neighborhoods to get better. We tend to blame the wrong people for the problem. The problem is not the new homeowner who comes in and makes a property better. The problem comes from our laws and lack of social safety net that allow people to lose their longtime homes when prices in the neighborhood goes up. If we did things right, everybody would benefit when a neighborhood's housing values go up. Lots of good observations. One more to throw in the mix. In places where population is growing, the negative impacts are often felt harder. In places where the population is declining, the positive effects are often felt more. It has a lot to do with space available versus need for taxpayers. Depends on if you already live there or not. The problem is you're not fixing anything. Yes. The immediate area gets safer and more affluent, more companies can move in. But the problem is the crime is not being fixed, it's just being forced into other areas, making crime worse elsewhere. As a person from Maryland, the gentrification in DC is turning parts of MD into hellholes. At the same time, in no way are you at fault for fixing up your area. The finger pointing needs to be directed at state and county governments for not doing their best to curb crime and limit these terrible zoning policies to create more affordable housing for everyone. Tell me who you are and I will tell you whether or not it is good for you. Net is a hard question. Some people obviously benefit and some people are crushed. Do those legitimate cancel each other out? The strong argument against is taking housing stock that is affordable for one group and making it unaffordable for them in their own communities. Housing is a discrete resource. Ethics of that are up to you. Anyone can fix up their own neighborhood. Problem is, some people don't. Gentrification can be a net positive, adding value. Keep in mind though that a net positive implies there are some gains, other losses, and the gain or loss can impact different groups. Gentrification often means the more vulnerable folks, lower earnings, or other such social groupings are priced out and don't have good alternatives. It's only okay if you are fixing the house to live in it and not sell for flip. Positive for those who own a house there. Negative for everyone renting or wanting to live there because they will be priced out.